Welcome to Books and Buns, WORLDbytes new show, where we have the chance to meet a new author of a new book that makes for good reading and discussion. I am Fabian Vera, and we are delighted to welcome Mick Hume, who is the author of Revolting, How the Establishment Undermined Democracy and What They're Afraid of. Mick will be talking to our volunteers about the work in his new book. So Mick, please kick us off by telling us why you wrote the book, and in the meantime I'll be making you a good cup of tea.
Thank you very much. Well, I wrote this book quite quickly after the EU referendum result and the American election result, but it's not about either of those things. It's about two problems that I've become aware of, which those two election and referendum results brought to the surface in a very powerful way. First concern of mine is the increasing gap between the rhetorical lip service that everybody in public life and politics pays to democracy and the way they're actually trying to undermine it in practice. We live in the age of I'm a Democrat, but probably for the first time in human history, every politician in the West has to say they support democracy. That's almost unique. But in practice, many of the old prejudices about the demos, the people, and wanting to keep power exclusively for a small club still exist and are coming more to the fore. And the two trends that I particularly identify in the book are the trend of investing power more and more in unelected and unaccountable bodies, the courts, expert committees, the European Commission, all being examples, the House of Lords being another example. And secondly, the resurgence of anti-democratic political prejudices, which have been really brought to the surface by both the Brexit referendum result and the election of Donald Trump in America, where the response has been, this just proves the electorate are not fit to make big decisions. The people are too ignorant, too ill-informed, too emotional, and essentially not up to democracy. The people are not fit for democracy rather than the other way around. These are old prejudices which have existed really since Plato and the invention of democracy in ancient Athens 2,500 years ago. Plato said much the same thing, that we'd be better off if the world was run by expert philosophers rather than these ignorant mob. For the last 50 years, it's not really impossible for people in power to express those kind of sentiments. Now we've seen them coming more to the surface in response to those results. So that's the first thing that worried me. My second concern is the way that the left has almost entirely abandoned its support for democracy and free speech. You know, I come from a tradition where these were always the causes of the left, from the days of the Levellers in the English Revolution in the 17th century, through the French and American revolutions in the 18th century, the Chartists of the 19th century, the suffragettes of the early 20th century. It was always a cause of the left, more democracy and more free speech for the masses. Now we see a situation where the left has more or less abandoned the cause of democracy, so they were all on the wrong side in the EU referendum because they would rather trust EU judges and commissioners than the working class people in this country who they just can't talk to anymore. So I want to really reclaim the issue of democracy and of free speech as an important part of putting the demos, the people, back at the heart of democracy.
After reading your book, from a young person's perspective, I am now able to actually speak out in a way. Why? Because I've been surrounded in university and everywhere I've been about people who have pro-Remain in Europe. And I'm not exactly a pro-Remain person myself. And I've been afraid of people telling me that I might be racist, that I may be crazy or part of some sort of crazy nutter group. And therefore I have been afraid to speak my mind out. And now that I've read the book, I know that I am not, and that 17.4 million people think like me. That I'm not by myself. So this book has given me the strength for me to speak my mind out. And I think that's a very good thing to take out of what you have written here.
One of the points that you brought up that I really appreciated was when you were talking about the politics of fear in your second chapter, and how both sides are kind of playing to that. Somehow on the left it became acceptable, that fear. So my question was, how can we bring that up to politicians without them trying to exploit it?
I mean, I think the politics of fear is such an ingrained part now of establishment politics. As you say, they all use rival scaremongering stories. So you can see the ridiculousness of both sides of the debate in the EU referendum. On one hand, we're told that if we vote to leave the EU, there's going to be immediate economic depression, there's going to be, as David Cameron said, there could be a third world war, or as George Osborne said, even worse, there could be falling house prices. You know, this, on the one side they're putting that, and on the other side, you know, you've got Boris Johnson saying, well, the EU just like Adolf Hitler. So you've got this kind of attempts on both sides to run their own personal kind of private project fears of the electorate. But what I think was heartening about the whole thing was actually the public didn't fall for it. The reason people did vote Brexit, as far as I'm concerned, wasn't because, you know, they were scared by what Boris Johnson said, or they were too ignorant to understand what David Cameron was saying. It was because they actually said, well, we will look at the facts for ourselves and make a decision based on what we think is in our interest. I think it was very heartening, in a context where politics is so depressing, the politics of fear on all sides, to see that people were capable of taking a decision independent of that. The other aspect of the politics of fear, which is now almost universal in the political class, is coming out very strongly, is fear of the masses. You know, and that, I think, is the real danger.
So, do you think that there is hope for the left? Or is this the end of the left? Because, you know, as you said, the leftists constantly position themselves against the working class by supporting anti-democratic institutions like the EU that did what they did to Greece. How can they recuperate from this? Because they are completely detached.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I think the left, as it stands in Britain as the Labour Party, has got very little prospect of really galvanising itself in any kind of way. But I think what's quite heartening about this is actually the old divide between left and right doesn't really operate on these issues. That's what's most striking. What you see now with an issue like democracy, Brexit, or the American equivalents, is those lines really being cut across, so that when you draw the line and say who is actually on the right side and the wrong side, you find yourself standing alongside some people that you may not have expected to find yourself standing alongside. The kind of new dividing lines being drawn in politics, which don't match the old divide of left and right. I think it's very important we're aware of that, and we are prepared to, you know, say, look, forget about that. The issue here is the future of democracy, and we're going to stand to defend that with whoever is prepared to stand with us. That's much more fruitful than worrying about whether the Labour Party can recover.
Why does it seem to logically follow that people's distrust of the masses leads to a trust of technocrats? Because surely, you know, you can see the examples of technocrats doing pretty appalling jobs in basically every central bank across the world, in, you know, the European Central Bank, in the IMF, in all of these institutions. Their track records are disastrous. So why do people trust them?
Well, I'm not sure that people do. Certainly the political class is keen to invest its authority in experts and technocrats. It really is the flip side of the mistrust of the masses. Is you can take this right back to Plato. Through Socrates, Plato makes it very clear, democracy is a dirty word. You know, it means mob rule. And what they want, what the great philosophers wanted, was rule of the experts, in particular rule of people like themselves. Obviously experts, in any democracy, experts are a very important part to play. They've got to offer expert advice and information. What we have now is a different situation where experts are being elevated to a situation where they actually don't offer advice, they give orders, they give instructions. But they are the only ones that can be trusted, because we are too ignorant, the masses are too ignorant to talk about these complicated things. We've got to trust it to the experts. There's a real confusion in all these discussions between technical expertise and political judgment. Political judgment is something where everybody's got to be their own expert, taking all the knowledge and information available to them, make their own decision about whose side they're on. The greatest philosopher has no more right or no more ability to make the right decision than the man or woman in the street.
According to what I've read in this book, it seems to me like you are for a House of Lords that is fully elected by the people. But actually, I've also seen that the media has taken it from a, let's say, Brexit type of view. For example, the 3 judges. A newspaper portrayed these judges. One of them was called a gay, and basically was saying that they were unworthy of making decisions by their sexuality, as though they didn't know anything.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, just to be clear, I'm not in favour of an elected House of Lords. I'm in favour of abolishing the House of Lords altogether. The only reason a second chamber exists anywhere in the world, in any parliament, is to block the will of the first chamber. The House of Lords is the most explicit for that, because it's not elected at all. But that only actually kind of makes clear what the second chamber is always for. If you look at the American second chamber, this is all dealt with in the book, go right back to the discussions at the time of the American Revolution about forming the Constitution. It was made very clear that the reason they wanted a second chamber, the Senate, was to restrain the passions of the masses. That's why, for example, in America, where the Senate is elected, every state in America gets 2 senators. House representatives, like any normal assembly, how many representatives you get is based on the size of your population, right? In the Senate, every state gets 2 senators. That means that Alaska and all the small conservative rural states get the same number of senators as California and New York and the big urban centres. And that's deliberately set up so that those smaller, conservative, more rural states can counter the influence of the big urban mass centres. So even an elected second chamber is basically a blocking mechanism. On the media, I mean, certainly, you know, yeah, that was the Daily Mail, wasn't it, you were talking about, that did that enemies of the people front page and everything. I'm completely against the judges being able to block or in any way interfere with a decision made by 17.4 million voters. That's got nothing to do with democracy. Right? That is a complete and elite attempt to disrupt democracy. I mean, those judges are all members of the EU elite, but what their private life's got to do with it, nothing at all. My attitude to the media is the same as my attitude to freedom of the press and free speech. It's the same as my attitude to democracy, really, which is there are a lot of problems with it. Democracy is never the easy option, and free speech and freedom of the press is never the easy option. But there's always one thing worse than it, and that's the opposite. There's always one thing worse than a free press, it's an unfree press.
I just wanted to make a point about Facebook tips for spotting fake news. You also have fact checkers. Is this just another example of the elite not trusting people's agency and people's ability to debate what they see, or is it good to have this information?
Yeah, can I jump on that? Because I'm actually quite interested in that point, because you know, this panic about fake news, I mean, it always existed. You just have to look at Hillsborough, for example. In the past, there was only a certain number of media outlets that would be able to control the news, whereas now it's like Facebook, social media. So I think, once again, it's another indirect kind of way of, you know, having content for the public, but now have more control over social media and so on. But also, it brings me back to a point about politics and facts, because a lot of people think politics is just about facts, which is why we need experts. But politics is more than facts. Even if the facts showed that, I don't know, violence in prisons worked, I politically wouldn't agree with it, because I'm against violence in you know, using violence in prisons to reform the prisoners. So once again, it comes down to my values and my ideology and where do I stand politically. So it's not just about facts.
I think also we should remember that this sort of panic about fake news and post-facts has only arisen because democracy has delivered two results that the elite, whether in the media or in politics, don't like. There wasn't a huge panic over fake news when the example you gave Mick earlier of David Cameron saying Brexit will lead to World War II. It was just obvious to everyone that that was a lie and that that was a stupid claim. People seem to be annoyed that their lies were not sophisticated enough to trump the lies of the other side. There have always been falsehoods out there that we need to do our best to counter, but the panic is actually not driven really by falsehoods at all, but by this change in the political landscape.
Very good points made. I mean, I really don't think there would have been a great panic about post-truth politics and fake news if Hillary Clinton had been elected president in America and Remain had won the EU referendum campaign here. It is very much an attempt to find some reason why people didn't believe what the elites told them. How could you lose an argument to Donald Trump? That couldn't possibly have happened. There's got to be some other reason for it. It's the Russians. They've hacked the election. Or low information voters, they talk about in America, by which they mean low intelligence voters, have been duped by post-truth politics and fake news. It's an attempt to find an excuse for your own failings and delegitimise the decisions that people have made. As Marissa says, you know, there's always been fake news, you can go back a lot further than Hillsborough, and people have been able to judge for themselves what they believe to be true. What this discussion comes down to is another illustration of not trusting the masses, saying people are not actually capable of judging for themselves. So we need some kind of expert intervention. That's what all this talk about fact checkers, about flags on Facebook. People are too stupid to know for themselves if something is fake. But politics, as has been said, is not just about facts. It's about moral judgments. It's about values. It's about ideologies and ideas. And it actually always does raise the question, what is the truth as you understand it? There are facts. Even they are often open to interpretation, depending on which side of the battle lines you're on. And we see that in the EU referendum. We're told people were duped by Brexit lies. About what actually happened was people took all that information in and decided for themselves that even if Brexit did mean economic instability, that it was still a decision worth making because they believed in increasing democracy and sovereignty.
So I disagree with like equating low intelligence with low information. So I'll take the example of myself. I was studying in Scotland at the time during the Scottish referendum, and at the time I was very unengaged in politics, but I wanted to make a choice. I wanted to decide for myself what to vote. I'd be talking to people who thought that Scotland should stay in the UK, and I was talking to people who thought we should leave, and I didn't know what to believe. It was something that I really had to go and do my homework on it, and it took a lot of time. I don't feel like it's necessarily obvious for everyone what to believe.
No, it isn't, and that's why what you're talking about is what politics is about. It's about struggling with an issue. It's about talking to people that you trust and arguing with them, debating with them, and deciding which side of the discussion you want to be on. That's exactly what it's about. What I'm talking about is the way that low information is used in American politics is as a code. What they really mean is low intelligence. They mean white working class people. You might say, well, that's all very right, good and right, but in the end, you know, most voters don't know as much as experts about a lot of subjects. Most people are quite badly informed, and why is that? And I quote a guy called Christopher Lasch, an American writer from the 1990s, who wrote a brilliant book called The Revolt of the Elites. And the point that Lasch makes is, of course people are badly informed about public issues because they have been removed from the democratic process. If you feel you've got no say in something, why on earth would you bother engaging yourself? If you're told that it's up to the central bankers to decide what happens to the economy, it's none of your business, why would you bother yourself with struggling with the details of it? And there are manifold political issues where that same rule applies. So democracy in that sense, and a proper democratic debate which involves the public, is really the key to cracking the problem of people being uninformed, because people will make themselves informed. And the most telling thing of all, I think, about the EU referendum in this country was the Electoral Reform Society did a survey of public opinion afterwards, and they came up with all this. They said that both campaigns were awful. We needed an official body to intervene and say that's true and that's not true. And I made the point in the book, maybe they should call it the Ministry of Truth, like Orwell did. But they also made the point, begrudgingly, that almost everybody they talked to said they felt this was the first time in their lives that their vote actually mattered. And so they'd really engaged themselves with the issue.
You talk about populism and you talk about it in your book as well. I just want to know, you obviously defined it as what's popular, obviously, but now it's become, I think, attached, and it's become slightly a dirty word now, and it's become attached to the alt-right and obviously the far-right movement. Why would you say that is?
Yesterday we were doing street interviews about whether to abolish the House of Lords. Some were for, some were against. A lot of them were very explicit against democracy and very for being ruled by experts and being ruled by lords. So basically, where does this explicit nature come from? Is it a good thing? Is it something that we can debate now? Is it worse than the lip service that's been paid to democracy?
I know fake news has always been an issue, and somehow we say it got way worse after Trump, but we were talking about it in August, like in July, like when Clinton still had like a 90% chance of winning the election. So I don't feel as though it was like this liberal whatever backlash against Trump's election. And I was interested in your point of view as a journalist. Like, we know fake news does exist, so I don't get why we're using it as some sort of mask that like we have to hide behind. Like, no, we're just saying that this exists. I know the millions of people that voted for Trump, a lot of them weren't paying attention to the fake news, they were paying attention to Trump, and like they liked what he believed, and that's great. But we have to, I feel like, pay attention to the fact that people were paying attention to lies that were being sold for them. I don't think that's an elitist thing for the left to say, that some people fall for lies. Left people fall for lies all the time. So the fact that fake news just came about because Trump won, like I just don't get behind that.
Populism, it's very interesting the way that populism has been changed, because in its origins in the late 19th century and early 20th century, populism was a badge that parties wore with pride. We are the party of the people, we are an anti-establishment people. They're often the farmers' parties in America. They were the populist movement that wanted radical change and were anti-establishment. And now there is no political party that calls itself populist. It's an externally attached, as you say, dirty word, which is supposed to discredit those who you attach it to. And the interesting thing is that in pure political terms, it's pretty meaningless, because if you look at all the political movements, groups and votes that are lumped under the populist badge, they are so dissimilar. You know, the French National Front, Brexit, Donald Trump, the left-wing government in Greece, the left-wing movement in Spain, all of them are somehow, the far right in Hungary, all of them are somehow populist. And it's become an all-encompassing brand, which just means parties which are dangerous because they're against the establishment, they're opposed to the EU elite. And you have to ask yourself always with these kind of labels, who is it that decides which parties are populist and which ones are, mainstream and respectable? Who is it which decides the truth and post-truth? It's always the same elites who are drawing the lines and making the decisions and expecting us to trust their judgments. I think the reason that the far right has been able to capitalise on a lot of these, the anti-EU sentiments and the pro-democracy, goes back to what I said in the first place, that the left has abandoned democracy. That it's not been possible for the last 40 years to criticise the EU without being accused of being some right-wing nutcase. And so it's been handed to the right on a plate. If you're worried about the EU, if you want to be pro-democracy, then these are the right-wing parties that are there for you to support by default. It should be a badge of shame for the left that they've allowed these kind of completely unrepresentative fringe groups to monopolise an issue like democracy. It's important to highlight the fact that these are very dangerous, poisonous anti-democratic prejudices which are coming back to the service of society. But if they exist, I think it's always, as my old mother used to say, better out than in. One of the key components of democracy has got to be no holds barred a public debate where free speech, which is the lifeblood of democracy, holds good and all opinions can be expressed and you can have them out and debate them. The moment you move away from that and start trying to say, no, we need to suppress those views because they're too dangerous, we need to ban or no platform those views because they're too dangerous, you've lost the argument. On America, the point is, if Hillary Clinton had won the election, fake news would not have been an issue. Nobody would have been talking about the Russians hacking the election if Hillary Clinton won. I can absolutely guarantee you that. No one would have been talking about it. It was raised during the campaign, you're quite right to say that, but it would never have become this kind of all-encompassing issue afterwards if Hillary Clinton had won the election. The idea that somehow the Russians attacked it, or that people have been duped by post-truth politics. I think most people who voted for Donald Trump don't think he's a great bloke. I deal with this in the book. Washington Post asked their readers to send them a short statement of why they voted Trump. And they got some fascinating, about 1,500 very quickly, and they were all fascinating, coherent responses. Very few of them say because they think Donald Trump's a great guy because they agree with him about women or immigrants. They didn't at all. They voted for them because they were sick of being treated with contempt by the political establishment. They made that very explicit. And one a woman who I quote in the book said that voting Trump was her only way to say, I am here and I count. And that's, in a democracy, that's exactly what the most fundamental democratic right is, that you are here and you count as much as anybody up there who's singing along with Madonna at her pro-Hillary concerts. And so they create that problem for themselves. They created the problem of Donald Trump for themselves by alienating the public.
Do you think that was also the case in Brexit, though?
No. I think they're two quite distinct. I think in the book I'd say that what the Brexit and Trump have in common is the reaction to them. It's the kind of anti-popular, anti-democratic reaction to them. I think in their own terms they're quite different. I've voted, absolutely passionately voted for leave in the EU referendum, campaigned for it, and have campaigned around the slogan for Europe against the EU for the last 15 years. I absolutely, positively believe that. The Trump thing is a negative response to the loss of political legitimacy by the elite. I would never have voted for Donald Trump any more than I could have voted for Hillary Clinton. And it's a difference between an election in which you have to choose between, you're voting for the narrow-minded candidate of a particular party, and a referendum in which you're faced with a very broad choice in which you don't, a vote for Brexit didn't mean you supported Nigel Farage. They're quite separate things. I think you could have a positive attitude to Brexit and a negative attitude to Trump.
So you think that those who voted for Trump were not making that decision rationally in terms of what he could bring to the politics of America?
Well, some of them maybe, but I think the majority made a very rational decision that they were sick of being treated with contempt, being told they lived in flyover country, which is a part of the country that real people who matter just fly over, they never actually visit, and they're being told they were underinformed, they're being told they were uneducated, they were ignorant, they were too emotional, they were sick of being treated, they were all racists. They were sick of being treated like that and talked to like that, talked down to like that. So they made a rational decision to stick two fingers up to the political elites. That doesn't mean necessarily all think that Donald Trump is the answer to America's problem, because he evidently isn't.
In response to that, though, hammer 17.4 million a lot, which I understand because it was 1 million plus more than those who voted to remain. And that was a lot of the argument in the first half, is the majority, what the masses want. But then in terms of Clinton, like you mentioned very briefly how she won by, more than 3 million votes. And I feel like that's kind of why the backlash was a lot worse in America versus Brexit, because it was the masses, though, who wanted Clinton. And Donald Trump won fairly, and I obviously concede that. He won through the Electoral College. But I just don't understand how it's, the masses in Britain, yay for them, and then when the masses in America don't get what we want, we're like leftist crybabies. Like,
I'm all for the masses on both sides of the Atlantic always.
Mhm.
But what you have to recognise is that actually that has happened in Britain and in America. Suddenly all the people are interested in, and I'm not talking about you, suddenly all the people are interested in democracy, who actually couldn't give a toss about democracy, and suddenly they're using the language of democracy to defend their position. So in Britain, the reason I talk about 17.4 million a lot is because it is the biggest vote in British political history for anything ever. And it's important to keep reminding everybody about that when we're told that 3 judges or 800 members of the House of Lords know better than 17.4 million people. In America, the Electoral College is part of the same system that I talked about before. When the American system of government was set up, the Electoral College is one of those devices that the Founding Fathers introduced in order to limit popular democracy. The Supreme Court, the Senate, and the Electoral College, 3 what they call checks and balances. What they mean by that is a check on popular democracy, some way you can make sure people don't run away with themselves and we end up with some decision that we don't like. The Electoral College, which weights the voting according to the state by state, is part of that same system. So it is a fundamentally flawed system of democracy, absolutely. And Americans who care about democracy should always have been against the Electoral College. However, it is the system under which every single democratic president has ever been elected in America. And nobody batted an eyelid when they were elected under it. It only becomes an issue when you have this situation where the vagaries of the system mean that Trump actually won the popular vote, by the way, in 30 out of 50 states. But overall, because of the big population centres in California and New York, which were democratic, Clinton wins the overall popular vote. And suddenly everyone says, that's outrageous. It's the instrumental use of the language of democracy, and people who don't really care about democracy, but suddenly find it's a useful device to them to try and support their own position. And the same thing happened in Britain. Suddenly these people end up going to court, taking the government to court, saying Parliament must vote as parliamentary sovereignty as the basis of democracy. These people didn't care less for 40 years when parliamentary sovereignty was being walked all over by British politicians and the EU, using EU law to do it. Suddenly, when the referendum happens, they want to defend parliamentary sovereignty because they want to defend parliamentary democracy against the people, against the demos. So what's similar is you've got an instrumental use of democratic arguments. And I absolutely support the reform of the Electoral College. I think it's a disgrace to the lead democracy of the country in the world to have that system. But suddenly people have woken up and started talking about that only because their candidate lost.
So you discuss in the book how politicians can hide behind the fact that there's no established definition of democracy and still claim that they're democratic. What would be a good definition of democracy? Because some might say that maybe pure democracy would be having no governing body whatsoever and just us governing ourselves. Or is it a more direct democracy? And what would that look like logistically?
It's a very good question. Let's go back to the origins of the word democracy. In ancient Athens, demokratia, there are 2 component parts of that word. Demos, the people, and kratos, meaning power or control. Right? That's what democracy is about. It's about the empowering of the people. It's about people having control. Which is why, by the way, democracy was usually used in Athens as a dirty word by its opponents to mean mob rule. They had a system of direct democracy where citizens actually made the decisions themselves. But as we know, that was a very small city-state. The citizens were only white males. No women had the vote. Slaves obviously didn't have the vote. The whole thing is not a system of democracy that you think, oh, we can introduce that in 21st century Western societies. Thank goodness it's not. That's not for us. But the spirit of direct democracy, the idea of people actually having a direct influence in what happens in their society, we should be looking for. So we have a system which is called representative democracy. And the trouble with that, which sounds like a good idea because, that's the system which could work better in a big, complicated society, where you can't get everybody into the football stadium to vote on every single issue. However, what representative democracy has meant for the last 200 odd years is really a way of restraining popular democracy. It's been a way of monopolising political control in the hands of an elite. Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine had the great debate at the time of the French Revolution about what form democracy should take. And although Thomas Paine won in the sense that there was a revolution in America and a revolution in France, in the long term, Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, as I explain in the book, really won the argument that representative democracy should be about electing politicians who will decide what's best for the rest of us. So we have a system of representative democracy which is neither representative enough nor democratic enough. And it gets less and less so as time goes on. As I say, as more power is invested in commissions and inquiries and courts in particular. Now, what the solution to that is, I think it would be a mistake to start trying to write, here's our blueprint. Because actually these things are always invented and decided by people in the process of trying to change their societies. That's where they come from. They don't come from wonks and experts sitting in rooms. What we do need to do, which is what my book is attempting to do, is to ignite the spirit of democracy. To really get people to understand that we need to take a more active part in society, making our wishes clearer and finding new ways to do that. And I think igniting the spirit of democracy is really the precondition for making our democracy more worthwhile. Basically, there isn't a technical solution to the political problem of democracy. It's got to be about changing our political culture in the first place, and that's what the book is, a little kind of hand grenade that's thrown out there to try and ignite.
Right, well, thank you, Mick. That was an absolutely fascinating discussion.
I enjoyed it.
And I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So, Revolting is available online and in all good bookstores, and we would love to hear what you think about it too. So please do leave your comments in the section below. And if you would like to take part in Books and Buns future discussions, please do send us an email.